Alright, I need to tell you something and I need you to stay with me here because this is important. Late last week, the President of the United States picked up a telephone, called a United States senator from his own party, and shouted profanity at her. Not a Democrat, not a member of the opposition, a Republican, a member of his own team. And why? Why would the President do that? Because she voted to limit his power. Stay with me. What I'm about to walk you through tonight is something we haven't seen in American politics in a very, very long time. And I mean that literally. I've gone back through the records. This kind of organized, deliberate, internal resistance to a sitting president from his own party on matters of war and peace. You have to go back decades to find a parallel. And here's the thing. This isn't theater. This isn't the usual Washington kabuki where senators furrow their brows, issue concerned statements, then fall in line when the vote comes. This is different. This is Republicans actively, legislatively working to block the president's authority to take this country to war. I want you to understand what that means. Picture this. It's late. Capitol Hill is mostly dark, but phones are lighting up across the Senate office buildings. Staffers are texting each other. Senators are refreshing their screens, checking, double-checking because what they're seeing doesn't compute. The president isn't attacking Democrats. He isn't going after CNN or the New York Times. He's attacking his own people, his own party, his own senators. And for the first time in years, they're not backing down. Now, I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between genuine resistance and performance art. I've watched Republican after Republican stand at a podium, express grave concerns about this president, then vote with him 98% of the time. I've watched the concerned tweets, the anonymous quotes, the background grumbling that never ever translates into action. This is not that. What happened last week is Republicans joining with Democrats to advance a war powers resolution, a formal legal mechanism to restrict the president's ability to commit American military forces without congressional authorization. Think about what that means. Think about it. Members of the president's own party looked at his behavior, looked at what he's saying, what he's threatening, and concluded, we need to put legal guardrails around this man before something irreversible happens. That's not a policy disagreement. That's an intervention. And what was Trump's response? Did he reach out? Did he try to understand their concerns? Did he negotiate? No, he raged. Reports indicate the president called Senator Susan Collins, a Republican, a member of his own party who supported this resolution, and berated her with crude language. Profanity, threats, not persuasion, intimidation. And here's why that matters. Here's why that phone call tells you everything you need to know about this moment. When a leader responds to constitutional limits with fury rather than dialogue, they're telling you something. They're revealing how they actually view power, not as something granted by law, not as something shared with a co-equal branch of government, but as something personal, something that belongs to them, something that no one, not Congress, not the Constitution, not their own party has any right to constrain. That belief that power is personal property is exactly what triggered this revolt. Alright. Now I need to tell you what actually set this off. And I need you to sit with it for a minute because when you first hear it, it's going to sound absurd. President Trump has been publicly, repeatedly in front of cameras floating the idea of using military force to acquire Greenland. I know how that sounds. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like something you'd scroll past on social media and assume was taken out of context or exaggerated. It's not. The President of the United States has stated on multiple occasions that military options are on the table for acquiring territory that belongs to Denmark. Denmark, a NATO ally, a country we are treaty-bound to defend. Now, Senator Chris Murphy spelled this out on the Senate floor. And when he did, it landed like a thunderclap. Because here's what most Americans don't understand about NATO, and this is crucial. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty establishes collective defense. It's the heart of the entire alliance. An attack on one member nation is legally formally treated as an attack on all member nations. That's the principle that has kept the peace in Europe for 75 years. That's why NATO exists. Greenland is Danish territory. If the United States took military action against Greenland, we wouldn't just be attacking Denmark. We would be attacking the NATO alliance itself. We would be at war with our own allies. We would be shredding the most successful military alliance in modern history. Let that sink in. The scenario that members of the United States Senate now have to take seriously, not as theory, not as hypothetical, but as genuine possibility, is an American president putting us in direct military conflict with Europe over land acquisition. This is not normal. This is not strategic ambiguity. This is not tough negotiating. This is the kind of rhetoric that in any previous era would have ended a political career overnight. But we don't live in that era anymore. To understand why this is happening, you have to understand how this president's mind actually works. Not the caricature, not the talking points, the actual operating logic. Trump doesn't think about geopolitics the way leaders traditionally do. He doesn't see alliances as mutual commitments. He doesn't see treaties as binding obligations. He doesn't see international law as a framework that constrains everyone equally, including him. He sees everything as a deal. And in a deal, there are winners and losers, leverage and weakness, properties to acquire and opponents to dominate. That worldview works in real estate. You can pressure a seller. You can bluff a competitor. You can walk away from a negotiation and come back stronger. But international relations aren't real estate. Countries have militaries. Alliances have tripwires. Words have consequences that cannot be taken back with a phone call. When you tell the world that military force is on the table for acquiring allied territory, you're not making a deal. You're issuing a threat. And threats once made change the calculations of everyone involved, allies, adversaries, and your own military commanders. Republican senators understand this. Many of them have sat in classified briefings. They've seen how quickly situations escalate. They've watched crisis spiral. They know that words from an American president carry weight that can't be retracted with a tweet. That's why they're scared. Not because they've become liberals, not because they hate Trump personally, because they can see where this road leads and they don't want to be standing there when it arrives. The War Powers Act exists for exactly this kind of moment. It was written in the aftermath of Vietnam, when Congress finally confronted the reality that presidents had been dragging the country into wars without proper authorization. The law requires the president to consult Congress before committing troops. It limits military action without congressional approval. It's supposed to be an emergency brake on presidential war-making power. Republicans just pulled it against their own president. That's unprecedented. Let's go back to that phone call with Senator Collins, because that call wasn't really about one vote. It was a window into something much deeper. When Trump picked up that phone and unleashed on a senator from his own party using profanity, issuing threats, treating her vote as a personal betrayal, he revealed exactly how he processes resistance. He doesn't see it as democracy functioning. He doesn't see it as checks and balances working as designed. He sees it as treachery, as an existential threat, and that matters. How a leader responds to being told no tells you everything about how they'll govern when the pressure really builds. Trump's entire second-term strategy has been built on projecting total dominance, complete control, inevitability. The image of a man who cannot be stopped, cannot be questioned, cannot be constrained. Nothing shatters that image faster than members of your own party voting against you on national television. So, he lashed out, not with arguments, not with persuasion, with intimidation. And here's what the senators noticed. It didn't work. Collins didn't change her vote. Neither did the other Republicans who crossed over. They absorbed the anger. They hung up the phone. They went back to work. That moment, that failure of intimidation may be more significant than the vote itself because it demonstrated something this president has never fully accepted. Loyalty in politics is conditional. It's based on mutual interest, shared goals, perceived benefit. When a leader stops providing those things, loyalty evaporates. And right now, Republican senators are doing the math. They're looking at the war rhetoric. They're looking at the emergency declarations. They're looking at the chaos. And they're asking themselves, what exactly am I getting out of this? If the answer is nothing but risk, the alliance doesn't hold. That calculation is happening right now on Capitol Hill. Not ideology, math. Now I need to tell you about something happening in parallel. Because the war powers fight isn't the only front in this conflict. While Republicans were organizing around military authority, Trump made another move. He declared a national emergency related to Venezuelan oil asset. On the surface, this sounds like energy policy. securing resources, protecting American interests. But look closer. The timeline for actually benefiting from these assets, years, maybe decades. The infrastructure required, massive. The primary beneficiaries, multinational energy corporations, not American consumers. So why declare an emergency? Because emergencies do something very specific in American law. They concentrate power. They allow the president to bypass normal procedures, normal oversight, normal congressional involvement. They shift authority away from the legislative branch and toward the executive. Emergencies are supposed to be for genuine crises, imminent threats that require immediate action. They're not supposed to be strategic tools for avoiding scrutiny. But that's exactly how they're being used. And I want you to notice the pattern here. Every time oversight tightens, every time Congress starts asking uncomfortable questions, a new emergency appears, a new threat materializes. The conversation shifts from accountability to crisis management. This isn't accidental. It's a strategy. Flood the zone, change the subject, raise the stakes, hope attention drifts elsewhere. I've watched this playbook operate for years. I'm watching it operate right now. The Venezuelan oil emergency isn't really about oil. It's about control. It's about narrative. It's about keeping the machinery of government so overwhelmed with crises that it never gets around to the slow, unglamorous work of oversight. And that oversight is exactly what this president cannot afford. Here's what most people are missing in all of this. While the headlines focus on war powers and emergency declarations, a quieter pressure is building underneath. And it may ultimately matter more than any of the dramatic confrontations. I'm talking about oversight, documentation, timelines, the boring procedural machinery of government accountability. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has been asking questions, not making accusations. Asking questions, pointed, specific procedural questions. Why have promised document releases been delayed? Why have review timelines stretched indefinitely? Why have statutory deadlines slipped without explanation? These aren't partisan attacks. They're process inquiries. And process inquiries are what administrations fear most. Here's why. When a senator gives a speech criticizing the president, it's theater. Everyone expects it. It changes nothing. But when a senator starts asking about Inspector General compliance, about missed deadlines, about chains of documentation, that's different. That's the beginning of a paper trail. And paper trails don't care about political loyalty. Records are stubborn things. They don't disappear with a tweet. They don't dissolve at a rally. They sit in filing cabinets and servers waiting to be subpoenaed. Administration described certain disclosures as priorities, urgent, transparent, arriving soon. The rhetoric was clear, but the reality has progressed far more slowly than the promises implied. When that gap between rhetoric and execution becomes visible, credibility suffers. And once credibility is questioned, every future explanation faces deeper scrutiny. That's the trap Trump is trying to avoid. A request for an Inspector General review isn't an accusation. It's an acknowledgement that something in the process isn't working, whether through mismanagement, competing priorities, or something else. But for a president who treats every inquiry as an attack, even neutral oversight feels like warfare. And that's the problem. Because oversight isn't optional. It's how democratic governments function. It's how power stays accountable. It's how citizens know whether their leaders are actually doing what they claim. When a president treats oversight as an enemy rather than a feature, the entire system starts to destabilize. Let me tell you what Republican senators are actually worried about. It's not just Trump. It's not just this moment. It's what comes after. Here's the thing about constitutional norms. Once they break, they don't automatically repair themselves. Precedents set by one president become tools available to the next. Shortcuts taken today become standard practice tomorrow. If a president can declare emergencies to bypass Congress whenever it's convenient, future presidents will do the same. If a president can threaten military action against allies without consequence, future presidents will feel empowered to go further. If a president can treat oversight as sabotage and intimidate lawmakers who disagree, future presidents will inherit that playbook. Republicans understand this. The ones who've been in Washington long enough have seen how power accumulates. They know that defending a president today might mean enabling a different president tomorrow, one they don't agree with, one they can't control. That's why some of them are finally drawing lines. Not because they've had a sudden change of heart about Trump personally, but because they're thinking about the institution, about the Senate's role, about whether Congress will still matter in 10 years if they let these precedents stand. That calculation is what's driving the revolt. It's not ideological. It's structural. It's Republicans asking themselves, if we don't stop this now, will we even have the ability to stop it later? And increasingly the answer they're arriving at is no. Once a president successfully establishes that he's guided only by personal judgment, not by law, not by treaties, not by constitutional limits, the office itself transforms. It stops being a position within a system and starts being the system. That transformation is what some Republicans are now trying to prevent quietly, carefully, with full awareness that they might fail, but trying anyway because the alternative is worse. I want to bring this down from abstractions for a moment. Because all of this, the constitutional debates, the power struggles, the procedural fights, has consequences for real people. When a president threatens military action, military families feel it. They're the ones who get deployed. They're the ones who don't come home. When trade relationships destabilize because of erratic foreign policy, workers feel it. Factory orders get canceled. Supply chains break. Jobs disappear. When allies lose trust in American commitments, everyone feels it. The dollar weakens. Security agreements fray. The world becomes less predictable. None of this is abstract. The rhetoric about Greenland isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. It makes European allies question whether they can rely on American protection. It makes adversaries wonder if they can exploit the chaos. It makes neutral countries recalculate which side they want to be on. That erosion of trust doesn't show up in a single headline. It accumulates gradually, deal by deal, relationship by relationship, until one day America wakes up isolated in ways it never expected. And the emergency declarations aren't just constitutional concerns, they're economic distortions. When presidents use emergency powers to direct resources toward political goals rather than genuine crises, markets warp, investments get misallocated. The economy serves politics instead of people. This is what's at stake, not just principles, not just norms. Lives, livelihoods, the basic stability that allows people to plan for the future. When government becomes unpredictable, ordinary people pay the price. They're the ones who can't hedge their bets. They're the ones who depend on systems working as advertised. The Republican revolt isn't just about limiting presidential power. It's about protecting the predictability that makes normal life possible. So, where does this go from here? I'm not going to make predictions. I've been at this too long to pretend I know exactly how things will unfold. Politics doesn't work that way. Too many variables, too many personalities, too much chaos. But I can tell you what to watch. First, watch the War Powers Resolution. If it actually passes with enough votes to survive a veto, that's a genuine constitutional moment. It would mean Congress is reasserting authority. It's let atrophy for decades. Second, watch the oversight requests, the Inspector General inquiries. The document demands the subpoenas. If those processes keep moving forward despite pressure, it means the institutional machinery is still functioning. If they quietly stall out, that tells a different story. Third, watch the Republican coalition. Right now, the senators pushing back are a minority within their party. If that minority grows, Trump's leverage shrinks. If it stays isolated, the revolt fizzles. Fourth, watch Trump's language. When he feels cornered, he escalates more emergency declarations, more extreme rhetoric, more loyalty tests. The more pressure he feels, the more dramatic his responses become. And fifth, this is the most important one, watch what happens to the people who said no. Susan Collins, the other Republicans who crossed over, the senators asking uncomfortable questions. Do they face consequences? Do they lose committee positions? Do they get primaried? Or do they survive intact? The answer will tell you whether resistance is viable. Whether saying no to this president carries an acceptable cost. Whether the incentive structure of Republican politics has actually changed or whether this was just a temporary blip. That's what will determine whether this revolt matters or whether it's just another headline that fades away. I want to step back and ask a bigger question because this story isn't really about Trump. Not ultimately. It's about something older and more fundamental. It's about whether the rules that govern power are stronger than the individuals who temporarily hold it. Every democracy faces this question eventually. At some point, a leader comes along who believes the rules don't apply to them, who treats every limit as an obstacle, who sees the Constitution as a suggestion rather than a constraint. When that happens, the system faces a choice. It can bend, it can break, or it can hold. Right now, we're watching America's system get tested in real time. The emergency powers, the war rhetoric, the intimidation of lawmakers, the treatment of oversight as sabotage. All of it is pressure against the boundaries. And the boundaries are responding. Not as quickly as some would like, not as firmly as others would hope, but responding. Republicans crossing the aisle. Inspectors general receiving formal requests. Senators asking uncomfortable questions. Votes being taken that weren't supposed to happen. That's not nothing. It doesn't guarantee the system holds. History is full of democracies that bent until they broke, that tolerated small violations until large ones became normal, that woke up one day to find the rules had been rewritten while everyone was distracted. But it's not inevitable either. Systems hold when people make them hold. When lawmakers decide their oaths matter more than their careers. When institutions prioritize function over convenience. When citizens pay attention and demand accountability. None of that happens automatically. All of it requires choice. And right now some people are making that choice imperfectly, incompletely. But making it, that's the story underneath all the noise. Let me leave you with 3 things. First, this revolt is real. Republicans aren't just criticizing Trump in private anymore. They're taking vote. They're advancing resolutions. They're drawing lines they've never drawn before. That doesn't mean they'll succeed, but it's happening and it matters. Second, emergency powers are being weaponized. The pattern is clear. Whenever scrutiny builds, a new crisis appears. The conversation shifts from accountability to emergency response. This isn't coincidence. It's strategy. And recognizing that strategy is the first step to not being manipulated by it. Third, precedents outlive precedents. Whatever happens in this conflict will shape how power works long after Trump is gone. The shortcuts taken today become the norms of tomorrow. That's why the stakes extend far beyond any single personality or any single election. These 3 things, the revolt, the weaponized emergencies, the precedent problem, are all connected. They're different angles on the same question. Can the system constrain a leader who doesn't believe he should be constrained? We're about to find out. Here's what I'll leave you with. Democracy doesn't defend itself. It depends on people. Lawmakers who take their oaths seriously. Institutions that prioritize function over politics. Citizens who pay attention even when it's exhausting. Everyone playing their part, holding the line. Right now, some of that is happening. Not enough maybe, not fast enough probably, but happening. The resistance to Trump isn't coming from outside anymore. It's coming from within. From people who know him, who've worked with him, who've defended him, and who've decided that some lines cannot be crossed. That's significant. It doesn't guarantee a happy ending. History is full of warnings ignored, chances missed, systems that bent until they shattered, but it's a reminder that outcomes aren't predetermined, that choices matter, that individuals in the right moment can change the direction of events. We're in that kind of moment right now. What happens next depends on whether enough people in Congress, in institutions, in the public decide that the rules still matter more than any individual. That power should be constrained, not personal. That democracy is worth the inconvenience of actually maintaining it. I'll be watching, and so should